My name is Dolores Whitcomb. I am 69 years old, and I live alone in a quiet house at the edge of a fading Midwestern town. I was never extraordinary. I was a wife for 43 years, a mother for 38, and a hospital cook for most of my working life. If you asked anyone around here about me, they would say I was steady, reliable, the kind of woman who kept the coffee hot and the floors clean. Most people forget women like me existed once we no longer serve a purpose. But on the morning my story truly began, I was not thinking about purpose or legacy or how easily a life can be uprooted. I was thinking about how long tea can sit before it loses its warmth. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a chipped porcelain cup with a thin crack along its rim, the same cup my husband Harold used to hand wash every Sunday. I lifted it, but the tea was already cold. Then I saw it. The garage door, wide open. At first, I thought the wind had caught it. Harold used to remind me to check the latch on stormy nights. But the air was breathless, still as linen. I stepped closer to the window, one hand braced on the kitchen sink. The light poured in from outside, stretching a long shadow across the concrete floor. A shadow without shape. Because the shape that had been there for 20 years was gone. The Mustang was gone. The car my husband spent 2 decades restoring, bolt by bolt, with the devotion some men save for prayer. I walked outside on legs I barely felt. The garage smelled of oil and dust. His workbench still stood against the wall, tools hanging neatly, each one outlined in marker, just the way he kept them. There was an emptiness in the space where the car had always stood, an absence so loud it rang like a struck bell. My son, Matthew, stood at the end of the driveway. He did not look at me at first. He was checking his phone. When he finally met my eyes, his shoulders rose, as if he were the one bracing for impact. "Mom," he said, "you need to hear me out." I did not speak. I knew that if I opened my mouth, something inside me would break clean in two. He swallowed and delivered it like a business transaction. "I sold it, the car. Claire and we're going to Paris. She has connections there. It's important for her career. You never drove it anyway. It's just a car. You need to get over it." Get over it. I heard the words, but my mind reached backward. To Sunday mornings with Harold, to his stained fingers tracing stripes along the hood, to the quiet promise he once made, "If I go before you, doll, you take the wheel." Just once. Now the wheel is gone. Sold. Erased. I did not shout. I did not beg. Instead, I stepped back into my kitchen and closed the door without a sound. There are kinds of pain that have no volume. They settle in the bones. That night, I sat in the dark and said nothing. Matthew did not call to ask if I had eaten. Claire did not send a message to see if I was all right. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock Harold once repaired. I realized then that someone can love you and still misplace you. Someone can share your blood and still forget you are breathing. I believed it was the end. I believed I had lost the last piece of the man who once saw me. But the next morning the phone rang. "Mrs. Whitcomb," a man's voice said. It was gravelly, unsure. "My name is Frank Ellis, from Ellis Auto Restorations. I believe I have your husband's car. I think you need to come down here. There's something he left inside, something meant for you." My tea sat untouched. The crack in my cup caught the light, and for the first time since Harold died, I felt something flicker through the grief. Not hope, recognition. Because some promises do not end at death. They wait, they bide their time, and they call you back when you are finally ready to hear them. I did not always live in silence. There was a time when my days were full of noise. Pots clanging in a warm kitchen, muddy boots thudding across the back porch, Harold's laughter drifting in from the garage as he tuned an engine. That was my first life, before widowed mornings and cold tea. I was 19 when I met Harold Whitcomb at the county fair just outside Cedar Grove. He was standing beside a broken tractor, sleeves rolled, grease on his jaw like war paint. He did not flirt. He simply asked, "Do you have a handkerchief?" I did. He wiped the oil from his brow, nodded once, and said, "Thank you, miss." By the time summer folded into autumn, he had asked my father for permission to court me. That was 1959. I was not swept off my feet. I was steadied. We married simply, in a church with peeling paint and real lilies from my mother's yard. Our honeymoon was a picnic by Miller's Creek with fried chicken and lemonade. Harold promised me 3 things on that day: honesty, home, and one good car he would build with his own hands. I never cared much for cars, not then. But I cared about the way he kept his word. Cedar Grove was the kind of town where everything stayed in its place. We bought a small white house with green shutters and a porch that sagged every spring. The roof leaked during storms, and I learned how to set out pots before the thunder came. Harold worked at the steel mill. I worked in the elementary school cafeteria. Every dollar had a purpose. We patched coats instead of buying new ones. I baked bread instead of buying it. It was not a sacrifice. It was simply how life was done. Matthew was born 7 years later, a quiet baby with his father's solemn eyes. I remember holding him against my chest at dawn, listening to his soft breaths while Harold slept in the next room. I thought then, this is the only wealth I'll ever need. I did not know how heavy that kind of wealth could become. When Matthew turned 10, Harold brought home the Mustang frame, rusted, dented, forgotten by everyone but him. I remember the way Matthew's face lit up, as if his father had dragged home a wild horse that they would tame together. Saturday mornings became ritual, Harold teaching him how to sand chrome, Matthew pretending not to cry when he scraped his knuckles. I would watch from the kitchen door, hands in dishwater, and think, I am watching 2 men become family. There were storms, yes. Arguments over bills, nights Harold came home late from the mill with a temper. But he always returned to that car, as if it held the part of him untouched by the world. Sometimes I envied it, the patience he gave that machine, the tenderness in his hands as he polished the hood. Yet I also understood. That Mustang was not steel and bolts. It was how he prayed, years folded. Matthew finished high school, left for college, came back different. Sharper, busier, carrying ambition like a badge. He still hugged me, but with one arm. He barely glanced at the garage. The car no longer meant what it once did. I told myself it was natural. Children grow. They outpace the things that raised them. But I stayed. I cooked Sunday roast. I pressed Harold's shirts. I held this house upright through sickness, layoffs, funerals. I used to believe that was enough. To be the quiet spine of a home. I used to be the roof. Now no one remembers I kept out the rain. That thought came to me the night after the car vanished as I scrubbed a dish that was already clean. Outside, a motorcycle revved down Oak Ridge Road, sharp and careless. The sound split through the stillness like a crack in ice. And for the first time, I felt something unfamiliar rise in me. Not grief, not anger, recognition. The world had forgotten what I had been, but I had not. There are things a man can never say out loud, so he leaves them in the shape of something he builds. For Harold, it was that Mustang. I did not understand it at first. To me, in those early years, it was nothing but a heap of rust sitting on a trailer, one more expense we did not need, one more project that would keep him away from the dinner table. But marriage teaches you to listen not only to words, but to silences. And in the silence of that garage, I began to learn the language of steel and devotion. He started after he retired. I remember the first morning he did not put on his work boots. He stood in the hallway like a man misplaced, as if without the factory whistle, he had lost the clock that held him upright. For a week he tried to stay indoors, rearranged my pantry, polished doorknobs, cleaned the gutters twice in 3 days. Restlessness burns differently in men. It does not cry, it paces. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, he came home with that striped Mustang body, eyes bright with something I had not seen in years. "She's tired," he said, "but she ain't done." I think he was talking about himself. Our son, Matthew, was still living at home then, fresh out of community college with plans bigger than our small town could hold. He helped Harold unload the shell, laughing at the absurdity. "You sure this isn't scrap?" he asked. Harold only smiled. "Scrap is what you quit on." I saw something pass between them, something quiet and male, bound by challenge. I envied it a little, even then. The garage became Harold's cathedral. Every morning, he disappeared into it, coffee thermos in one hand, toolbox in the other. I would hear the clink of wrenches, the low whistle he made when concentrating, the occasional muttered warning to a stubborn bolt. I brought him coffee at 10 and again at 2. Each time, he would pause, nod, take the cup with both hands like it was holy. I never complained about the grease smudges on my mugs. Some stains are worth keeping. 5 years passed that way. Piece by piece, he brought that car back. Fenders first, then the frame, then the heart, the engine. There were nights he came in with scraped knuckles and swollen fingers, and I would press cold clothes to his skin while he winced in silence. "You don't have to finish it," I would tell him. "It's not about finishing," he'd say. "It's about staying with it." At the time, I thought he meant the car. I know better now. The first time the engine roared awake, he did not cheer. He looked at me, just looked, eyes wet with victory, too personal for words. "Hear that, doll?" he whispered. "That's mine. Didn't buy it. Build it." Some men bring their wives jewels. Mine brought me proof that he could resurrect what the world had thrown away. But the moment I returned most was not loud. It came one late autumn evening when the sun was sinking and the air smelled of cooling metal. I carried his coffee, careful not to spill, and found him seated on the driver's side installing the rearview mirror. "Through this," he said, "you see what's behind you, but you keep driving forward." I handed him the cup. He didn't take it right away. Instead, he reached out, resting his oil-streaked fingers over mine. His touch was warm, but the words were warmer. "When I go before you," he said, "you drive her. Just once. Promise me that. Don't stop moving, doll." That was Harold's way of asking me to survive him. I never told him how much that terrified me. I had always been the passenger, the keeper of the home. I ironed shirts, baked bread, and knew which floorboards creaked in winter. But driving? That was freedom, and freedom was something I had spent my life giving to others. I only nodded. Some promises are too solemn for speech. When Matthew moved out, the garage grew quieter. He no longer came in to hold a wrench or pretend to understand carburetors. Success made him impatient with patience. I watched his visits shorten. His eyes wandered when Harold talked. Once I heard him tell Claire, "He's obsessed with that car, as if you can fix life with tools." I said nothing. Some truths must ripen. Years. Later, after Harold passed, I could not bring myself to open the garage for 3 months. Grief is not a storm. It is rust. It takes slowly, unseen, until something that once moved freely just won't turn anymore. When I finally entered, the dust lay soft on the hood like ash. I placed my hand there and felt nothing. No spark. No warmth. I thought Harold had asked the impossible. To keep going without the one who taught me how. I never imagined that betrayal would come not from death, but from the living. The day the car vanished, the wound was not only loss, it was the shattering of a covenant. My husband had built that machine with reverence. My son dismissed it with convenience. He reduced 20 years of memory to a ticket to Paris. And yet, I did not scream. Because Harold had given me one last instruction, hidden beneath steel and sorrow, to keep moving. Even when no one remembered I once kept out the rain. Some men leave diamonds, mine left steel and promise. And I would learn, far too late, that steel endures far longer than blood. I woke before the sun and padded into the kitchen, still carrying the warmth of sleep on my shoulders. I filled the kettle, set out my chipped porcelain cup, and listened to the house breathe in that patient way old houses do when they have survived more winters than anyone living inside them. The tea steeped while I watched the backyard take shape from the dark. Thin bands of blue tugged at the horizon, and the oak out back revealed its bony winter fingers. I turned toward the sink and saw the reflection in the window. The garage door was open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. I walked to the back door with the cup in my hand, tasted the bitterness of oversteeped tea, and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was cool and clean. The concrete of the driveway still held the night's chill. The garage smelled of dust and oil and a faint sweetness from the orange hand soap Harold used to keep by the sink. The The space where the Mustang had slept for years was a polished rectangle of negative light. No burgundy curve, no gleam of chrome, only the ghost of an oil stain and a coil of hose like a shed snakeskin. I stood at the threshold, one hand on the frame, and understood with a steadiness that reached past shock. The car was gone. The promise inside it, gone. My breath shortened. I counted like I taught myself after Harold passed. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6. I was still standing there when Matthew turned into the driveway, his sedan rolling to a confident stop as if nothing in the world required gentleness. He got out with his phone in his hand and a look that told me he had already rehearsed what he would say. He saw the open garage and then me, his shoulders lifted, not quite a shrug and not quite a defense. "Mom," he said, and he tried on a smile that did not belong to his face. "You need to hear me out." I watched the muscle in his jaw work harder than it needed to. I set my cup on the workbench and saw the ring of tea it left on the scarred wood where Harold had once traced bolt patterns in pencil. I said nothing. A silence can be a chair you invite someone to sit in. If they cannot bear it, they will talk. Matthew talked. "I sold it," he said, like reading from a receipt. "The car. Claire and I are going to Paris. She has meetings, people to see. It could change everything for her. You never drive it anyway. It just sits here. It is better this way." The words came in neat lines as if he believed organization could make them kind. He waited, and I let the quiet answer him first. I watched a bird land on the fence and tilt its head as if to ask whether it, too, had misheard. "You sold your father's work," I said finally, no higher than my kitchen voice. He flinched, but only a little. "Paris is her big chance," he said. "You would not understand." I looked at my son and saw the boy who once cried over a skinned knuckle while pretending he did not. I also saw the man too hurried to notice his own reflection in the windows he passed. "We do not sell history to buy a passport," I said. My voice surprised me, not because it was firm, but because it was calm. He ran a hand over his hair. He glanced at the house, as if the siding might take his side. "It is just a car, he said. And the sentence fell between us like a plate that would never be mended. "Your father spent 20 years rebuilding it," I said, "and I spent 40 keeping this family upright." He looked away, toward the street, where a motorcycle shredded the morning with a bright, careless snarl. The sound broke open the stillness. He tucked his phone into his back pocket. He gave me the expression adult children give their parents when they have already chosen their path and want absolution more than advice. Behind him, at the passenger door, Claire stepped out, careful in her new heels on the uneven driveway. She wore sunglasses, though the sun was barely awake. Her hair was perfect in a way that rejected the weather of our town. She stood by the car and assessed the house with an appraiser's gaze. When she looked at me, it felt like a measurement. "Dolores," she said, sweet as corn syrup, the kind of sweetness that sticks to the roof of the mouth. "We know this is hard. Matthew agonized over it. Paris is a once-in-a-lifetime platform for my work. It is really for us as a couple. You understand sacrifice." She was not rude. She was efficient. She smiled not with her mouth, but with the idea of a smile. I wiped the tea ring with the corner of a towel Harold used to fold into tight squares. I folded it again. I set it down. "I understand sacrifice," I said. "That is why I know when it is being demanded by the wrong person." Matthew took a step closer, palms up. "Mom, please. The car was sitting here. It needed to be used. This way it does. Something good." I let the wind carry away the first reply that rose and waited for one that would not poison the air. "It already did something good," I said. "It kept your father alive after the mill. It kept me company when I could hear him in the tools. It kept us honest about time. That is more than a trip." Claire's sunglasses reflected the empty garage. For a moment, I saw a tiny copy of myself standing inside them, small and upright. She adjusted the frame with one finger. "You are being sentimental," she said. "Objects hold people hostage when they cannot move on." I looked past her to the yard where Harold had once pitched baseballs to Matthew until the light failed. I thought of rain and the pots I used to set out before storms. I thought of the roof I had been on. Moving on is not the same as throwing away, I said. Sometimes it is the opposite. Matthew's voice rose, but not to a shout. It was the strained pitch of a man trying to keep peace on his terms. I got a fair price, he said. It is not like it was worth a fortune. And we had to decide quickly. Claire's flight is booked. The meetings are lined up. This is time sensitive. He wanted me to argue about numbers, so he would not have to hear about value. I refused him that shelter. You had a key. You let yourself in. You took what did not belong to you, I said. I let each clause land separately, like tools set in their outlines on the pegboard. He shook his head. He tried to smile. He tried to be the boy who once asked for permission and waited to be told yes. He's gone, Mom, he said. You need to let some things go, too. I felt the truth inside his words and the harm riding on its back. Grief does ask for release. So does convenience. Between them, families fracture. Your father is gone, I said, but that is why what he built matters more. It is not a museum piece. It is an oath. Claire stepped forward. The perfume she wore had a clean citrus top that could not quite hide a chemical bite. We will send you pictures from Paris, she said brightly. The offer had the shape of kindness and the weight of mockery. You would love the doors in the Latin Quarter, burgundy like the car, very poetic. She was winning a game I had not agreed to play. I chose a different game. I turned and closed the garage door halfway, enough to make the morning light cut a diagonal across the floor. Dust hung in that triangle like something holy. I stood in it. This is not a negotiation, I said. It is a boundary. Matthew's face softened for a heartbeat. He looked younger, almost afraid. Do you hate me? He asked, for doing what I thought was right for my family. There it was. The moral knot tied at the center of us. I wanted to take his face in my hands and tell him a story where love forgives everything. I wanted to tell the truth that love forgives much. But it does not always repair what has been broken. No, I said, I do not hate you. I am deciding whether to trust you. He swallowed. His eyes shone with the shame of someone who suddenly realizes he is standing on a bridge while loosening its bolts. Claire exhaled a soft, exasperated sound, as if we were late to an appointment that mattered more than this one. She touched his sleeve, and the gesture was proprietary. We should go, she said. We have to finish packing. Matthew hesitated. He looked at me. He looked at the garage. He looked at the open slice of light on the floor. For a moment, I believed something might unspool inside him and lead him back to himself. He kissed my temple quickly without waiting for my permission. I will call you from the airport, he said. Please try to be happy for us. He got into the car. Claire put on her seatbelt with a crisp, affirming click. As they pulled away, she lowered the window and offered a smile that revealed nothing. Take care, Dolores, she said. We will bring you something pretty. The last of the exhaust drifted into the garage and thinned. I stood there and listened to the silence settle back into its place. I closed the garage door the rest of the way and rested my palm against the cool metal. In the kitchen, the tea was cold. On the workbench, the ring had dried into a faint brown moon. I washed the cup. I dried it. I set it where Harold had always set it. I sat at the table and placed my hands flat on the wood. I did not cry. I did not rage. I took inventory of what remained. A house with a good roof. A name I had kept. A history I would not sell. The town was waking. The motorcycle returned, louder this time, bright with a freedom that does not ask permission. I felt the outline of a choice take shape the way a blueprint becomes a wall. The day the car vanished was the day my voice returned, though I still chose to speak quietly. Whether or not to forgive would be another day's work. Whether or not to forget was decided. I did not call the police. I did not call my son. I did not call anyone. The absence of the car was already loud enough, and I refused to add sirens to a wound that required silence. Some people believe that rage must roar to be real. They are wrong. There are griefs that arrive without sound, that enter through the ribs and sit there, enormous and immovable, like something sacred that can no longer be touched. I closed the garage door and returned to the kitchen. The house looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, yet I felt as if I were walking into a photograph rather than a room. Flat, too still, the air missing whatever gave it breath. On the table, my dinner plate rested beside an untouched napkin, and a portion of chicken had gone dry around the edges. I did not remember sitting down to eat. I did not remember leaving the table. Time had folded without warning. I gathered the dishes and carried them to the sink. The plate slipped in my wet hand and clattered against the porcelain basin. I steadied it, fingers trembling. I was not shaking from weakness. I was shaking from the effort of keeping everything inside. Above the sink hung the clock Harold fixed years ago, its pendulum swinging in a perfect, indifferent rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The only proof the world had not stopped. I rinsed the plate and placed it in the rack. My movements were methodical, almost ceremonial. I wiped the table. I folded the napkin along its creases. I straightened the salt and pepper shakers. These small obediences were all I had left to control. There is a particular humiliation in witnessing your own displacement, watching your worth weighed and dismissed by a child you once held against your breast. I gave birth to him. I just don't know when I lost him. The thought surfaced without invitation, and I let it stay. I dried my hands on the towel, the same towel Harold used to carry warm bread to the table, and hung it on its hook. The house creaked in the familiar places, the old bones of the floorboards speaking the language I once understood better than my own. But tonight, nothing felt familiar. Even the walls seemed to lean away. I moved through the living room, checking lamps, adjusting curtains, performing the rituals that once made a home feel tended. Harold's armchair sat untouched, the cushion molded to his absence. I laid my hand on the fabric and felt only the chill. Beside it, the photo of our young family smiling from its frame. Harold tan from summer, me holding a 2-year-old Matthew whose fist clutched my hair. I traced the glass, not to remember but to acknowledge what had changed. It would have been easy to crumble in that moment, to collapse into tears and demand answers from a God who had already taken much. But I stood still. There is a strength that does not look like strength. It does not lift voices or fists, it holds. And that night I held. I walked to the front door and slid the bolt into place. I was not afraid of harm. I was preserving the last sanctuary I could claim. Through the window, the streetlights flickered on, casting their amber glow across the empty road. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and fell silent. Life outside moved forward. Inside, I remained. I sat at the kitchen table once more, folding my hands in my lap. This was the table where Matthew had studied arithmetic, where Harold had opened his lunch pail after late shifts, where birthdays had been sung over grocery store cakes. Now it held only a placemat and the faint ring of tea. I felt anger begin to stir, not as fire, but as iron, a cool, dense weight settling in my core. Anger that did not seek destruction, but definition. I could have called him. I could have shouted into the phone, demanded he return, demanded he undo what he had done. But some lines, once crossed, cannot be coaxed back. To plead is to invite further trespass. To rage is to confirm powerlessness. Instead, I chose stillness, the stillness of stone, the stillness of waiting for the next move with eyes unblinking. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the siding, and a loose branch scraped against the roof like a whispered warning. I thought of Harold's words, "When I go before you, drive her, just once." I wondered if he had ever imagined this, that the journey I would be forced to take had nothing to do with wheels or asphalt, that instead it would be a return to myself. The night deepened. I rose and turned off the lights, leaving only the hallway lamp glowing a soft amber. The house shifted into darkness slowly, like a body preparing for sleep, yet unwilling to rest. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and removed my shoes one at a time. I placed them neatly beside one another on the floor. Harold always said you could measure a person by how they left their shoes. Careless shoes, careless mind. When I lay back against the pillow, I did not close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the ticking clock echo down the hallway. I thought of Matthew's words, "You don't understand," and I asked quietly, what is it that I do not understand? That ambition justifies betrayal? That memory has no equity? That a woman who no longer serves is meant to fade? I did not cry. I did not pray. I simply remained. Because sometimes the greatest act of defiance is to remain, to refuse erasure, to inhabit the space one has earned, even when those we love have abandoned its gravity. Somewhere past midnight, I felt a shift. Not outside, within, a settling, like sediment finding the bottom of a riverbed. It was not peace, not forgiveness. It was clarity. I would not chase what had been taken. I would not beg for its return. I would wait. I would watch. And when the moment came, I would act. Not out of vengeance, but out of remembrance. For I had lost a car, yes, but I had also been reminded, painfully, that I had not yet lost myself. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. The night kept its counsel, and I, at last, kept mine. I woke before dawn, though I must have slept. The house was wrapped in gray silence, the kind that hums around grief like static. I moved through the rooms as if through a memory, touching surfaces with careful fingertips. My teacup was still on the counter, rinsed and dried from the night before. I set water to boil without tasting the thought. Survival, I was learning, does not arrive as strength. It arrives as routine. The telephone rang at 6:12 a.m. I nearly didn't answer. At that hour, calls bring only news of death or wrongdoing, and I believed I had already received my allotment of both. But something in me reached for it anyway. The cord curled like a serpent across the counter. I lifted the receiver. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" The voice on the other end was male, worn around the edges, carrying hesitation like weight. "Is this Dolores Whitcomb?" "Yes." My voice sounded foreign in my own. Ears paper thin. "Who is this?" A pause, then, "Ma'am, my name is Frank Ellis. I own Ellis Auto Restorations out on County Road 12. He exhaled, a sound like someone steadying himself. "I believe I have your car, your husband's car." My hand tightened on the receiver. "That car was sold." The words came out low, controlled, like a held breath. "My son—" "I know," he cut in, but not unkindly. "He brought it yesterday. Told me he needed a quick sale, but ma'am—" Another pause. "Your husband asked me to keep something safe, something inside the car, and he told me to give it only to you." Silence stretched between us, taut as wire. In that moment, disbelief fought with something older, recognition. Harold had secrets, yes, but never of betrayal. If he left something, it was not an accident. It was my intention. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'd rather show you," Frank said. "If you can come down here. Today. Please." I stared at the window over the sink. The sky was lifting from ash to pearl. The kettle began to whistle behind me, but I did not move to silence it. "I'll be there," I said. I hung up the phone with steady fingers, though my heartbeat thrummed in my ears like distant machinery. Steam spilled from the kettle, ghostly and aimless. I turned off the stove. I did not pour tea. Why didn't I call Matthew? That question would be asked later, by church women and neighbors and faceless strangers on the internet once the story found its way beyond our county lines. Why didn't she call her son? Why didn't she give him a chance to explain? Because some answers do not belong to those who broke the question. Because trust, once taken, is not something you hand back like a borrowed coat. I dressed slowly, pulling on my faded wool coat and the leather gloves Harold gave me one Christmas after I complained of cold fingers at the market. They were worn soft now, shaped to my hands. On the hall table sat my keys, beside a jar of screws and loose change Harold once emptied from his pockets. I took only the keys. As I opened the front door, the air met me like a wall, sharp, metallic, awake. Frost clung to the grass in silver threads. Across the street, a man scraped ice from his windshield, his motions brisk and thoughtless. Life continued, indifferent to the grief of old women. I drove our sedan. Never once had I taken Harold's car, even after he died. The road to County 12 was long and flat, flanked by harvested fields and skeletal trees. My breath fogged the cabin. I drove without turning on the radio. I wanted to hear the world. At one point, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My face looked more like my mother's than I remembered, lined, pale, stern. I thought of the day Matthew was born, the way I pressed his tiny fist against my heart. I gave birth to him. I just don't know when I lost him. Ellis Auto Restorations was set back. From the road, a broad metal building with bay doors and a gravel lot. Rows of half-reborn cars stood like relics awaiting resurrection. A man waited outside, hands buried in his jacket pockets. Tall, gray-bearded, shoulders sloped by time. He stepped forward as I parked. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" I nodded. "I'm Frank." He extended a hand, then seemed to think better of it and simply gestured toward the shop. "Thank you for coming." We walked in silence through the open bay door. The air inside was warm, laced with oil and steel. Tools clanged somewhere in the back, rhythmic and distant. Under the fluorescence, tarps covered the shapes of patient machines. And there, at the end of the row, sat the Mustang, Harold's Mustang, burgundy paint, chrome trim catching the light like a held breath. My feet refused to move. "I couldn't keep it," Frank said quietly, not after realizing who it really belonged to. He kept his eyes on the car. "Your husband brought it here 2 years before he passed. Asked me to install something behind the dash. Said it was insurance. Not for money. For truth." My throat tightened. Truth about what? He looked at me then, and there was sorrow in his eyes, not pity. He didn't say. Only that if it ever came to you, it would mean you already knew what you needed to know. A tremor passed through me, subtle but deep. The kind that signals not collapse, but awakening. "May I?" I asked. He nodded and stepped aside. I approached the car, laid my palm on the hood, metal cool beneath my glove. My reflection wavered in the paint, small, ghost-like. The driver's door opened with the exact sound I remembered, a sigh born of years. I slid into the seat. It still smelled like Harold, leather, tobacco, citrus from the polish he favored. For a heartbeat, I could almost believe he was in the next room. Frank leaned in, pointed. "Behind the radio panel." He showed me how to remove it. I reached forward, pressed where he indicated. The panel loosened with a soft click. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name, written in Harold's block script. Doll. My gloved fingers hovered above it. I did not open it. Not yet. Some things must be carried home, in silence, before they are spoken aloud. I closed the panel, cradled the envelope in my lap, and inhaled the stillness. "Thank you," I said. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Frank replied, his voice low. "Your husband didn't build a car. He built an anchor. Don't let anyone convince you to drift." I rose, envelope pressed to my chest like a sacrament. I did not tell Matthew. I did not tell anyone. Some truths are not warnings. They are reckonings. Frank did not rush me. He stood a few paces back while I sat in Harold's car with the sealed envelope resting against my lap, the weight of it unfamiliar, yet somehow expected. There are moments in life when the world does not move forward or backward. It simply holds its breath. That garage, with its soft whir of heaters and scent of grease, was caught in such a moment. I could feel Harold there, not as a memory, but as intention. I stepped out of the car slowly. My knees trembled, though not from weakness. Some truths require the body to adjust before the mind can understand. Frank gestured toward a side room lined with old photographs and invoices. A small break area with 2 metal chairs and a coffee pot. "Come sit," he said. "You'll want to hear this somewhere quieter." I followed him, the envelope pressed against my coat like a fragile relic. He poured coffee into a paper cup and slid it across the table, though I made no move to drink. His hands, large and scarred, settled on the edge of the table, fingers curling and uncurling as if preparing for confession. "I owe your husband my life," he began. No preamble, no theatrics, just a fact. Ellis Auto wasn't always this place. He glanced around the room, eyes soft with memory. 15 years ago, I was working out of a single-bay garage behind my cousin's farm. The bank was closing in. I was 2 months from losing everything. Business, house, marriage. I'd made some bad decisions, got behind on taxes. I told myself I'd climb out, but pride is its own anchor. He paused, rubbing his thumb along a scar near his knuckle. Your husband used to stop by. Not often, but enough. Asked about the engines I was working on. We didn't talk much beyond that. He wasn't a man for chatter. I nodded. Harold spoke most freely with silence. Frank smiled faintly. That he did, but he saw more than most men ever say. He took a breath. One night, I was in that back shop late, just sitting in the dark. I had a notice from the bank on the workbench. Foreclosure. Auction date set. I hadn't told my wife. I didn't know how. Harold walked in. I didn't hear his truck. Just there. He didn't look at me as he continued. His eyes stayed fixed on something distant, buried in a decade. He didn't offer pity, didn't ask if I needed help. He just said, "You still want to build or you're ready to quit?" I told him I didn't have a choice. The bank made that decision. He shook his head. Choice isn't owned by banks. Then he placed a folded paper on the workbench, told me to read it after he left. I leaned forward. What was it? A co-signature, Frank said quietly. He'd backed a loan, 5 figures, enough to clear the arrears and buy this land. He tapped the table. No collateral, no contract, just his name next to mine. Emotion caught in his throat, rough and unvarnished. I ran out after him. Asked why. He said, "A man who still walks into his shop at night ain't finished." That was it. He drove off. I closed my eyes briefly. It sounded achingly like Harold. "You paid it back," I said. "Every cent," he nodded. "It took me 4 years, but he wouldn't take the checks. Made me put them in a tin box under his workbench. Said he'd open it when he needed it. I doubt he ever did." I let the words settle, absorbing their shape. Harold had never told me. Not because he hid it, but because he didn't consider it extraordinary. To him, decency required no audience. Frank studied me then, gauging something. He talked about you know, not in the way most men talk about wives. No complaints, not stories, just reverence. He said you held up the roof while he rebuilt the engine beneath it. The breath caught in my lungs. I kept my gaze steady. "He knew you'd come," Frank said softly. "Maybe not how, maybe not when, but he knew. That's why he left it with me. Said when she's ready, she'll understand what to do with it." I looked down at the envelope in my hands. Its edges were worn slightly, as if Harold had carried it himself more than once, before placing it in its hiding place. A message rehearsed. "What is in it?" Frank asked. "I haven't opened it," I said. He nodded once, in approval rather than curiosity. "Then it's yours to claim in your own time." Silence settled again, but this time it did not ache. It held shape. It had direction. "You said he built an anchor," I murmured. "I did." Frank folded his hands. "Most folks build monuments to be remembered. He built something to keep you steady when the tide came in. That car, and it ain't a trophy, it's a map." A map. The word shivered through me, past grief, past betrayal. A map implied movement, a path, a choice, yet unmade. "Most widows," Frank continued, "come here asking for restoration. They want their husbands' cars rebuilt so they can freeze time. You came for what's next." I stood. My knees no longer trembled. Frank rose too. "You don't owe your son an explanation," he said quietly. "Some lessons ain't spoken. They're alive." I met his gaze. "What do I owe?" He held my eyes. "Yourself. Nothing less. Nothing more." I carried the envelope to the car. I did not place it on the passenger seat. I held it in my lap with both hands. Outside, the wind lifted dust across the gravel, swirling without destination. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life, steady and obedient, like breath returning to a body long stunned. As I drove down County Road 12, a question rose. Uninvited, unwelcome, undeniable. If Harold prepared for this, did he know our son would betray us? Pain flared, sharp and clean, or had he trusted me to stand where blood had stepped away? I did not know the answers, but I knew this. I would no longer wait to be erased. Harold had set the map. It was time I learned where it led. I took the envelope home and did not open it in the driveway. I set it on the kitchen table like a guest who needed a chair and a measure of quiet before being asked to speak. Then I washed my hands as if grief could be rinsed from the skin and dried them on Harold's old towel, the edges frayed soft from decades of use. Only then did I sit, slide a butter knife under the flap, and lift the seal with the care I used to use on Matthew's fevered bandages when he was small and burning. Inside was Harold's handwriting, square and patient, the script of a man who never hurried an instruction, a small brass key taped to the top right corner, and beneath the letter a manila sleeve stamped with the faint blue logo of First National. My breath shortened. I pressed 2 fingers to the pulse in my neck as if I could slow the river while reading the bridge. The letter began with my name in the only tenderness he ever allowed to look like ornament. Doll. If you are reading this, time has done what time always does. Sit. Drink water. You will want to act. First, breathe. I am not leaving you riddles. I am leaving you weight-bearing walls. He never wrote about feelings when feelings were enough to crack a man in two. He wrote in the language of structure. He wrote that months before he got sick, he noticed Claire's questions were angled toward the house, not the family, the way she lingered on title and deed, the way she counted stairs out loud, then laughed, calling it a habit of a woman who hates falling. He wrote that she asked Matthew once, when she thought Harold was out of earshot, whether his name was on our property yet, and Matthew said it would be eventually, and she said that was a comfort, like a plane ticket held in hand rather than on layaway. He wrote that he could be wrong about people, and that he had been wrong before, but he did not think he was wrong this time. He wrote, "Let Matt stumble, but do not let yourself fall. You are the one who keeps the foundation." He underlined foundation once. He never underlined anything twice. The brass key was labeled in Harold's block script, First National, Box 214. The manila sleeve from the bank held a photocopied signature card with both our names, dated a year before he died, a list of contents in his careful hand, and a second envelope folded around a stack of papers that looked like certificates from another era. I pulled them out and read a company name I barely recognized, a tech firm Harold had once mentioned only to say he met a man in the hospital cafeteria whose son was building things that lived in phones. Harold had invested a small sum for the sake of the man's pride and promptly forgotten the investment, the way you forget a seed you dropped in a crack of soil behind the garage. There were transfer records, a note to the bank manager in Harold's handwriting asking that I be briefed on value if I came alone, and a list of 3 people I could trust if I needed counsel. Frank Ellis, Pastor Ray, who did our roof blessing after the hailstorm 20 years back, and Mrs. Cole from the credit union, who once found $20 I dropped and drove it to my porch like it was a lost child. My hand went light. The room tilted. I set the papers down and gripped the edge of the table until the wood stopped moving. For a moment I wanted to call Matthew, to say his father had written in ink what I had feared in whispers, to say that this was not about a car, but about the people who gather under a roof and call it a life, to say that he should come home now. We would read the letter together and let the truth be the surgeon neither of us could afford to refuse. But the phone sat inside a ring of sunlight on the counter, and I left it there. I could not ask the one who broke the question to answer it. Instead, I put on my coat and tucked the bank key into my glove like a talisman and drove to First National, the town waking around me in hesitant increments, school buses yawning into traffic, the bakery releasing its first batch of bread into the sharp air, a stray dog trotting with purpose, as if he, too, had appointments to keep. The bank manager was a woman my age with practical hair and a face that had learned how to carry 2 emotions at once. She read the note Harold had left on file and led me to the vault without making me explain the tremor in my voice. Inside the box were the original stock certificates and a second short letter in the same steady hand. Doll, if I am not there to tell you, ask for Mrs. Howell to look up the current value. Take time before you decide anything. Roofs are not rebuilt in a day." Mrs. Howell typed, frowned, typed again. Then her mouth softened, the way mouths do when numbers reorder a life. She wrote the sum on a yellow sticky and slid it toward me as if I might spook. I did not gasp. I did not count zeros. I only felt heat rise into my face and then drain away like a tide that understood the moon had changed. Enough to pay off any debt Matthew did not know he had. Enough to live without fear of the water heater breaking. Enough to replace the gutters and fix the back step that had threatened my ankle for 6 winters. Enough to say no without worrying who would pay for that. I thanked her and signed the form that said I had seen what I had seen. Then I walked to the car with the envelope pressed under my coat, and for the first time since Harold died, I felt something shift inside me that was not a crack. It was a weight sliding into its rightful place. Back home, I read the rest of Harold's letter at the table where marriages are negotiated and groceries are sorted. He wrote about the night he saw Claire take a picture of the deed when she thought no one was watching, how she said she admired the age of our paper and how a live ink could look when it had never been disturbed, how she once asked if I ever felt unsteady on the stairs and then set a brochure for assisted living on the counter as if she had brought me flowers. He wrote that he did not want to make me suspicious of shadows. He wanted me armed with light. He wrote that if Matthew sided with her, it would not be because he hated us, but because he loved the life she promised more than the life he had learned. He wrote that men fall when they are told falling looks like flying. He wrote that he had placed the letter where he placed it because the car would be what drew a line straight through our days. He trusted Frank because he had watched Frank pay back every cent without being asked twice. He trusted me because I had been steady for 43 years in a world that congratulates noise. He ended with the sentence that knocked the air from my lungs and put it back again. Full of a different weather, if I am gone and you are reading this alone, do not shout and do not beg. Stand, breathe, then do what you have always done. Decide where the house ends and where you begin. I pressed the page flat and felt the impression of his pen beneath my fingers, the ridges made by a hand that once fixed clocks and engines and the hinge of our back door. Light shifted across the kitchen, catching the crack in my porcelain cup and turning it briefly into a seam of gold. Outside, a motorcycle tore down Oak Ridge and vanished into the distance. The noise did not enter me the way it had yesterday. I folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, then placed the bank key in a drawer where I kept my wedding ring when I kneaded dough or scrubbed the sink. I placed the certificates in a new folder and labeled it with a word I had not used for myself in years: security. I thought of calling Matthew again and did not. I thought of Claire and felt not hatred but a steadiness that did not require her to agree that I was real. Harold had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough to build a path across the river before the flood announced itself. The unspoken truth rose like a moon I could finally admit I had seen. He knew Claire carried weather into rooms and called it style. He knew she mapped exits while complimenting windows. He knew she was a hazard to the foundation if left unchecked. He also knew that our son might trip running after light and that it would not be my job to break his fall. It would be my job to keep the house standing so he would have someplace to return when the air cleared. I stood, slid the chair back under the table, and opened the garage door halfway so a triangle of winter sun could lay across the concrete where the car had slept. Dust turned in that beam and looked like a blessing. I did not cry. I did not smile. I let the weight of preparation settle where fear had been, and I whispered into the room that had held both our work and our quiet that I had heard him, that I would not fall, that the foundation would hold. I did not tell Matthew I had been to see Frank. I did not tell him about the letter, the key, or the truth. Harold had seen long before I dared to name it. Some truths live best in silence until their weight is needed. Instead, I invited them both to dinner. I called on a Tuesday morning. My voice was calm, almost casual. Supper, this Sunday. Roast potatoes the way your father liked them, 6 o'clock. There was a pause on the line, a flicker of hesitation or suspicion. I could not tell which. Then Matthew said, "Sure, Mom, we'll be there." I could hear Claire's voice in the background, low and faint, like the sound of someone examining a document. That Sunday, I set the table with the good china, white porcelain trimmed in faded gold, the plates Harold and I received on our wedding day. I ironed linen napkins, laid knives and forks in alignment sharp enough to reflect the window light. The house smelled of thyme and beef, onions caramelizing slow in broth. I prepared everything with deliberate care, the way one prepares for a ceremony rather than a meal. When they arrived, the sky was lavender with the last drift of daylight. I saw them through the kitchen window. Claire stepping out first, adjusting her coat collar with 2 fingers. Matthew trailing behind, eyes fixed on the porch steps. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said. Matthew kissed my cheek, a hesitant press with no anchor. Claire offered a smile that was neither warm nor cold, only rehearsed. "The house looks lovely," she said, glancing around as if measuring its resale potential. We sat. I served without hurry. Plates filled. Steam rose. Conversation tiptoed around weather, traffic, an upcoming art exhibit Claire wanted to visit in Chicago. Matthew spoke of work without conviction. I listened. Not once did I mention the car. Claire was the first to drift toward the forbidden topic, not in name but in theme. It happened after the salad plates were cleared, during a lull when only the ticking of the dining room clock dared interrupt. She set down her fork with a soft click. "Sometimes," she began, eyes resting on the framed photograph of Harold above the sideboard, "holding on to objects can make it hard for families to breathe." She smiled then, a sympathetic actress. "Especially older generations who anchor themselves to the past. It can make the children feel trapped, responsible for things they didn't choose." Matthew's gaze dropped to his plate. I placed my knife gently beside my fork. I did not answer. The silence stood between us, unbroken and deliberate, like a judge who refuses to speak before the accused is finished. Claire mistook the quiet for concession. "I know it's painful to let go," she continued, "but I truly believe letting certain things move on frees everyone. Otherwise, we turn memories into cages, and that's not fair to the living." There, laid like bait, was her thesis. That grief is selfish when it refuses liquidation. I reached for my water glass, raised it, took a slow sip. Even my swallow was intentional. When I set the glass down, I met her eyes. I smiled. It was not an agreement. It was an acknowledgement. I let her speak first. Matthew cleared his throat. "Mom, Claire's just saying we all have to move forward." Forward, as if theft were momentum. "And Paris," Claire added softly, "has already opened so many doors for us. She's inspired him so much." She spoke of herself in the third person, a habit of those who see their life as theater, always auditioning for applause. I folded my napkin. "Did the food suit you?" I asked. She blinked. "Yes, it was lovely." "Good." I nodded. I wasn't feeding the past, I was feeding my guests. Matthew shifted. He sensed the contour of something shifting, a tilt in gravity he could not yet name. After dinner, I brought out coffee. I did not serve dessert. Sugar makes people careless with their words. I preferred precision. They lingered. I let them. Claire wandered the living room, pausing at the mantel, the bookshelf, the coat rack, touching nothing, cataloging everything. Matthew stood near the window, arms folded as though bracing for weather. "Mom," he said without turning, "I hope you're not holding on to resentment." I considered the question. Resentment is hot. This was cold, well-tempered, sharpened by clarity, not flame. "No," I said. "I'm holding on to what was promised." He turned. "What do you mean?" I offered nothing further. Some answers must be pursued, not delivered. Claire approached then, clasping her hands in front of her. "We want peace, Dolores. We don't want distance. We're a family." Family. The word arrived without weight, without root. I stood. "If you're finished, I'll walk you out." They followed me to the porch. The air outside had cooled to a crisp edge, night gathering in blue folds around the streetlights. A lone car passed, tires whispering over pavement. Matthew hugged me again, tighter this time, shame tightening his grip. "Call me if you need anything." It was an offer with no foundation. I nodded. Claire adjusted her scarf. "We'll check in soon." There was a flicker in her eyes then, confusion, perhaps even unease. She had spoken freely tonight, expecting rebuttal, explosion, plea. Instead, she met a wall she could not scale. Silence with a spine. They walked to their car. I remained on the porch until their tail lights dissolved into the curve of Oak Ridge Road. Inside, I cleared the plates, stacked the china, rinsed the silver, not as a woman dismissed, as a woman preparing. Power does not always enter rooms with noise. Sometimes it sets the table, waits, and lets everyone else believe they are still eating. I had known it was coming. There are footsteps a mother can hear long before they reach the door, and the day Matthew returned to speak about arrangements, I recognized the pattern in his stride, the practiced calm of a man determined to appear reasonable while building a case he hoped would be too rational to refuse. He called ahead this time, polite as a banker. "Can we come by Sunday afternoon? There are some things we should discuss." Not ask, discuss. A softer word for demand. I prepared no meal. I set no table. I brewed coffee and left it black. They arrived together, but not side by side. Claire entered first, smooth as a blade, her tone light. "We won't stay long." Matthew followed, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. He did not meet my eyes. That was how I knew the request would cut deeper than the last one. We sat in the living room across from one another. I took Harold's old chair. They took the couch. Distance remained between us in more than feet. He began with pleasantries. Weather, work, the state of my roof. I listened. Silence, I had learned, can be the most merciful rope or the cruelest leash. I let him choose. Finally, he inhaled, bracing. "Mom, it's time we talk about security. For you." Claire nodded, hands folded like prayer. "The house," he continued, stumbling slightly over the word, "it's a lot for one person. And, well, Claire found someone who specializes in estate transfers, so things don't get complicated later." I did not blink. "Estate transfers," I repeated. "You mean title changes?" Claire stepped in smoothly as though on cue. "It's not about ownership, Dolores. It's about protection. If something happened to you, Matthew would need authority to manage assets. Otherwise, it could fall into litigation. You don't want the government deciding your affairs." Not once did she say your home. Only assets. Only affairs. She had replaced walls with portfolio. I turned to my son. "Is this what you want?" His jaw shifted. "I want to make sure you're cared for." "You think I am not?" A question, nothing more. "You're alone," he said quietly. "It scares me." Liar, I thought. It was not fear. It was ambition in a borrowed mask. Claire reached into her bag and produced a folder. "This is preliminary, just documents to review. We'd never pressure you." She set it on the coffee table, neatly aligned with the grain of the wood, as if precision could soften intrusion. I reached out, not for the folder, but for the drawer built into the side table. I opened it and removed Harold's letter, still sealed in a fresh envelope, his name on the front in his firm block script. I did not hand it to Claire. I extended it only to Matthew. He looked stunned. "What's that?" "From your father." My hand remained steady. "For you." Claire leaned forward. "We can look at it together." "No." A single word, not loud but immovable. She froze. I turned to Matthew. "Read it. Alone." He hesitated, glancing toward her. She waited, lips parted, wanting to object but unsure how to challenge a letter from the dead without revealing her teeth. Matthew opened the envelope. The paper crackled. His eyes moved over the words. I saw the tremor when he reached the part Harold had written about stumbles, about storms, about foundation. His throat worked once, twice. "Mom!" His voice wavered. "Why didn't you show me this before?" "Because then," I said gently, "you were not ready to read it." Claire spoke then, impatience edging her tone. This doesn't change the practical concerns. Emotion can't override. I lifted my gaze to her. She fell silent. I returned my attention to my son. You once asked me, I said, if I loved you. I will answer now with a question. Do you remember what I taught you about keeping your word? His fingers tightened on the letter. As a boy, I continued, you promised your father the Mustang would stay in the family. Promises bind not because they are convenient, but because they are chosen. His eyes shone. Shame trembled through him, a living thing, raw and newly born. Mom, I made a mistake. No, I said, you made a choice, and now you must choose again. Claire rose from the couch. This is absurd. Love isn't proven by clinging to outdated. This is not about love. My voice did not waver. This is about memory. Memory is what remains when love has been tested. She stared at me, anger swirling like smoke beneath glass. You're manipulating him. I did not answer. I simply folded my hands. Matthew looked between us, torn at last from the spell she wove. Claire, she stepped back, disbelieving. You're not taking her side? It's not sides, he whispered. It's truth. This house, I said, rising slowly, will not be transferred. Not to you, not to anyone. I am still here. My name holds its weight. He bowed his head. Claire gathered her purse, movements sharp. We'll talk later, she snapped at him. He didn't follow. She left without another word. The door closed with a clean, final click. Matthew sank into Harold's chair. The letter hung in his hand like a verdict. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You fix what you broke, I replied, starting with yourself. He nodded, breath unsteady. Do you forgive me? I looked at him for a long moment. Forgiveness, I said softly, is not the same as permission. Outside, a wind rose, bending the trees. Inside, boundaries settled like walls rebuilt. He remained. She was gone. And in the quiet that followed, I knew. The line had been drawn, not in anger, in stone. Claire did not leave all at once. She unraveled herself from our lives carefully, thread by thread, as though she were peeling off a garment she never meant to wear. In the days after the letter, after the boundary was named and the deed refused, she came to the house not in apology, but in extraction. She moved through the rooms as though cataloging assets from a closing estate rather than a home that had once fed her supper. I heard her footsteps before I saw her, heels striking hardwood with the precision of someone who had already rehearsed her exit. I was in the kitchen washing a single cup when she entered. She did not greet me. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, gaze cool. I'm here for my things, she said. I nodded. Then take them. She mistook permission for weakness. She turned and ascended the stairs, each step a razor. I remained at the sink, listening to drawers open and close, to the hollow thud of luggage unzipping. Matthew was gone. He had left early that morning to walk the river road and think, or perhaps to pray without using the word. Time passed not in minutes, but in rooms emptied. When she came back downstairs, she carried 2 suitcases and a coat slung over her arm, her hair unruffled, her lipstick uncracked. She looked at me then, as one might look at a relic in a museum, aged, immovable, obsolete. You know, she said, her voice deceptively soft, women like you are why families stagnate. You hold on to the past like it's salvation. You think endurance is virtue, but it's just fear, molded into manners. I dried the cup in my hands. Fear of what? Of irrelevance, she said, stepping closer. Of being replaced. That car, this house, all of it is scaffolding, and when it's gone, you'll have nothing left but silence. I set the cup on the counter. The door isn't locked, I said evenly, but my son will not follow you through it. For the first time, her mask flickered. No shame, no remorse. Fury, sharp and startled, as though she had been bitten by something she believed no longer had teeth. You think he'll stay with you? She hissed. Out of guilt? I don't think anything, I replied. I know only this. Foundation does not chase storms, she scoffed. I gathered her coat. I walked to the door, but she paused on the threshold, one hand braced on the frame, and delivered the parting blow she had likely been saving. You will die in this house, she said, and no one will remember your name. I met her gaze. That is not my concern, I said, only that the house still stands. She left. The door shut without echo. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence she'd tried to wield as insult settled instead as clarity. 2 days passed before Matthew returned. Not to her, to the house. He knocked, though he had never knocked on this door in all his life. I opened it and found him thinner around the eyes. Is she gone? I asked. He nodded. Did she ask you to choose? Yes. And? He swallowed. I told her I already had. I stepped aside. He entered, not as a son returning triumphant, but as a man entering confession. He carried no luggage, only a worn envelope, Harold's letter, folded twice in his jacket pocket. He did not go to his old room. He went to the garage. I followed. The space stood as it had the day after the betrayal. Clean, barren, hollow. Matthew paused in the center, eyes fixed on the oil stain where the Mustang once slept. I keep hearing his voice, he said. Not what he said aloud, what he would have said now. I let him speak. Mom, I can't undo it. No, I said, but you can begin to repair it. He looked at his hands, the same hands that once held model cars and baseballs and a sandpaper block beside his father. I want to bring it back, he said. I don't care what it costs. It isn't for sale, I told him. He looked up, startled. You found it? Harold found it, I replied, long before it was lost. His breath caught. Where is it? Safe, I said, and waiting. His shoulders sagged with something between grief and gratitude. That evening, I phoned Frank. He answered on the first ring. Is it time? He asked. It's time. He arrived the next morning, the Mustang gliding off the flatbed like a memory returning to flesh. Burgundy paint caught the early light, casting a muted glow across the driveway. Neighbors slowed their cars but did not stop. They knew reverence when they saw it, even without knowing why. Frank helped guide the car into the garage, his hand steady on the wheel. Matthew stood beside me, silent, rooted. When the engine cut off, the air seemed to expand, as if the room itself exhaled after holding breath too long. Frank stepped back. She's home, he said simply. I approached the hood, laying my palm against the metal. Cold, then warm. Strange how machines can carry a pulse. Matthew edged forward. Mom, may I? Not yet, I replied. First, you listen. We stood before the car, 3 people bound not by blood, but by witness. Frank placed his keys in his pocket and faced me. He told me once, Frank said, you were the only person he trusted with an ending. I closed my eyes. Claire had taken nothing. She had simply revealed what could not be taken. She did not return for her final box. I shipped it to an address she no longer used. It came back marked undeliverable. I did not try again. Closure does not always come with confrontation. Sometimes it comes with a forwarding label no one claims. I walked the house that night, room by room, touching frames, straightening quilts, smoothing curtains. Not to tidy, to anchor. The hearth remained. The roof remained. I remained. Out on Oak Ridge Road, a motorcycle tore through the night, wild and free. This time I did not flinch. She had walked away, but I had not moved. And sometimes that is victory enough. Matthew did not return with speeches or explanations. He came with silence, which I accepted as the only language a contrite man can truthfully speak. In the days after Claire's departure, he stayed in his apartment above the hardware store, sleeping little, eating less, walking long stretches of the county road until gravel lodged itself in the soles of his shoes. I did not chase him. There are griefs, Mother must not interrupt or risk reopening the wound she wishes to close. On the 4th morning, he appeared on my porch. He did not ring the bell. He simply stood there, hands empty, shoulders burdened, the way he had once stood after scraping Harold's truck with his bike and waiting to see whether fear or forgiveness would meet him at the door. I opened it and stepped aside without greeting. He entered like someone uncertain of his invitation. He did not sit. He remained in the entryway, eyes traveling over the familiar, coat rack, porcelain angels on the shelf, the jar of flowers I kept not for beauty, but for proof that something could still be arranged with care. "Mom," he said, his voice raw, "I don't know how to begin." I looked at him, long enough for him to feel seen, but not rescued. "Then don't begin," I replied. "Continue." He frowned slightly. "Continue what?" "Repair," I said. His breath shuddered. He looked past me toward the hallway that led to the back door. "Is it here?" I nodded. We did not speak again until we reached the garage. I opened the door. Light filtered through the small side window, casting the Mustang in a soft glow that made the burgundy paint appear almost alive. The air smelled of dust, oil, and something newly awakened. Matthew stood very still, his eyes filled, not with tears, but with recognition. Shock gives way to understanding in stages, like dawn testing each color before declaring light. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. I did not argue. Deserve was not the question. I crossed to Harold's workbench and opened the drawer where I kept the folded shop cloths, worn soft by decades of engine grease and scrubbing. I withdrew one. Gray, frayed at the corners. I held it out. He stared at it a moment, perplexed. "Dad," I said gently, "always said, the first thing you fix is the hand that did the damage." He took the cloth. His fingers closed around it as though it might disappear. He looked at me then, searching for condemnation. I gave him none. Condemnation freezes. Remorse moves. I needed him to move. Without a word, I picked up the second cloth and stepped to the car. I placed my hand on the hood, sliding the fabric in slow, circular strokes. The metal responded with a dull gleam. Matthew hesitated, then moved to the opposite side. His movements were halting at first, uneven, but grief finds rhythm. Soon he worked in silence, polishing chrome trim, wiping dust from mirrors, kneeling to clean the wheels. Not as an heir reclaiming property, as a son requesting entry. For a long time, the only sounds were the low rasp of cloth against steel and the soft clicking of old sockets shifting in the toolbox when the wind nudged the walls. This was not a conversation. This was communion. At one point he paused and placed his hand flat on the driver's door, the same place Harold had rested his palm countless times when assessing a job. Finished. His shoulders shook once, barely. He did not cry. He trembled. "I told him to let go," he said, voice breaking like thin ice. "I told him it was just a car." I rested my cloth on the hood. "And what do you believe now?" He closed his eyes. I think it was a place where he put everything he couldn't say aloud." I nodded. "And now it is a place where you must listen." He turned toward me then, the full gravity of his shame standing between us like a figure neither of us could banish. "Do you forgive me?" I looked at the car, at the dusted gleam returning, at the space between what was wounded and what was being mended. "I will stand with you while you repair," I said. "The rest will come by your own hands." He bowed his head. We returned to our work. By noon, the sun had shifted high, filling the garage with a hard, honest light. The car stood cleaner, not restored. Restoration would take time, but no longer abandoned. In the act of care, it had regained its dignity. Matthew set down his cloth, breathing deeply. "Mom," he murmured, eyes wet now despite himself. "I want to learn. All of it. The engine, the wiring, how he rebuilt it. I don't want it to die with him." I placed a hand on the fender. "Then you will learn," I said simply. "Page by page. The journal is in the drawer." His gaze flickered toward the workbench. "Did he write it for me?" "No," I answered. "He wrote it for the one who stayed." His eyes widened slightly. "And you," I said, "have returned." He understood. We left the garage door open as we walked back to the house. The late afternoon breeze moved through the dry grass, carrying with it a scent of distant rain. In the kitchen, I poured water, not coffee. Remorse is too raw for bitterness. We sat at the table, the same place where Harold once put a broken toaster, and asked if I believed in second chances. Matthew traced the rim of his glass. "She said I would resent you one day." I lifted my eyes. "Do you?" He shook his head. "No, I resent myself." "Then use it," I said. "Regret is wasted unless it becomes intention." He swallowed. "I want to be better than I have been." "Then begin," I replied. "But begin here." We did not hug. We did not speak of the future. We sat in steady quiet, 2 hands apart but no longer estranged. That evening, I lit the porch lamp. A small act, a signal nonetheless. I did not wait for him to leave. I waited for him to stay. Some people believe forgiveness is a word, a declaration, a conferral. They are wrong. Forgiveness is a workshop. One hand wipes the dust, the other holds the light. And if both remain steady, something broken may yet carry us forward. I waited until late spring when the lilacs along Oak Ridge Road began to open, before I touched the keys Harold left for me. They had hung on the pegboard all winter, motionless, as though time itself had been holding its breath. Morning light filtered through the garage window, soft and forgiving, and I knew, without ceremony, that it was the day. Matthew stood beside me, not as a guide, but as a witness. He had been in the garage each week, studying Harold's journal, tracing diagrams with his finger the way he once traced picture books, relearning his father's language. But today, he said only 3 words. "Are you ready?" I glanced at the car, the burgundy Mustang, resting patient in the half-light. It no longer looked like a relic. It looked like an unanswered question. "I don't know," I replied, "but I am willing." I walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. It groaned slightly, like an old friend adjusting to an unexpected embrace. I lowered myself into the seat, the leather side beneath me, worn smooth by years of Harold's presence. My hands hovered above the wheel. There are moments when the past and future stand so close together, they breathe through the same mouth. This was one. I wrapped my fingers around the steering wheel. The texture surprised me. Firm, unyielding, yet warm. I had held Harold's hand in 1,000 ordinary ways, passing plates, folding laundry, turning off lamps. But this was the first time I held the shape of his absence. Matthew leaned against the doorframe, silent, reverent. "You don't have to drive it," he said gently. "I know," I answered. "That's why I will." I turned the key. The engine hesitated, then roared to life, a guttural, thunderous breath that rolled through the garage like awakening. The sound was not violent. It was alive. It trembled in my chest, pressed tears against my eyes I would not let fall. I rested my right foot on the accelerator, my left on the clutch. Harold had taught me once, long ago, before arthritis stiffened my hand and womanhood stiffened my schedule. I had forgotten the steps. My body had not. I shifted into first. The car lurched, eager. I guided it forward. We did not drive fast. I steered down Oak Ridge Road, windows open. The scent of cut grass drifted in, mingled with gasoline and wind. A choir of memory. Houses passed like turning pages. Some faces appeared in the windows. No one waved, yet I felt seen. The telephone poles flickered past, casting rhythm across the dash. I shifted into second, the gear catching with a low, satisfying click. Matthew watched me, eyes wide, a quiet awe that belonged not to a boy watching his mother, but to a man watching history refuse burial. As we crossed the bridge at Miller's Creek, I felt the strangest sensation. I was not leaving anything behind. I was carrying it forward. We drove past the cemetery where Harold rested. I did not turn in, not yet. I nodded once, into the wind. "You prepared the foundation. I am building the rest." At the bend where the road curves toward the ridge, Matthew spoke at last. "Mom," he said, voice thick. "Why didn't you fight her? Claire, you never shouted, you never threatened. Why?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Because she wanted noise," I said. "Some people build power from the reactions of others. I would not give her a wall to push against." So you stayed quiet? No, I corrected. I stayed rooted. There is a difference. We drove on, the engine humming like a heartbeat at rest. When we returned to the house, I parked the car in the garage, aligning the tires along Harold's chalk line, a guide he'd drawn years ago so he would never scrape the wall. I shut off the engine. Silence pooled. Not empty, but sacred. I rested my hand on the wheel. For the first time since he died, I spoke aloud to Harold. I drove it, I whispered, and I did not break. A breeze moved through the open doorway. I chose to take it as an assent. Matthew leaned over and pressed his forehead gently against the rim of the wheel. I let him grieve the father he had misunderstood, but finally heard. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the same cracked cup. I no longer considered replacing it. People may call women like me outdated, antique, relics of a quieter era. Perhaps we are, but I have learned this. We are the keepers of the house when the storm comes. We do not always shout from rooftops. Sometimes we simply do not move. And in that stillness, walls hold. I did not seek revenge. I did not chase the one who left. I chose instead to continue living. And sometimes that is the loudest answer a silent woman can give. If you're listening now, if you've ever been dismissed, replaced, made to feel like your time had ended, I ask you, did you walk away? Or did you drive forward? Because if no one tells you, let me be the one. It is never too late to take the wheel.